All things change, they evolve, and Viribus aesthetics is evolving as well. And this is a good thing. So let me explain to you my journey and why Viribus aesthetics and I, the person behind it, must change too. Let me formally introduce myself to you. My name's Matt and I'm a 23-year-old living in Sydney, Australia. I started Viribus aesthetics just over 8 years ago now. When I started Viribus aesthetics, I was 15 years old. It started as a way for me to practice my editing skills for my year 11 and 12 film subject in high school. But I think to explain why I started Viribus aesthetics, I have to give you a bit of a background story on me. So yes, I make bodybuilding videos, but I'm not a bodybuilder. I was a swimmer. And I chose to make bodybuilding videos because for almost a decade of my life, almost every day, I woke up at 4 a.m. for swimming training. And the only thing that could get me out of bed sometimes was videos by Nicandro Vision Motivation now, Machiavelli Motivation. And they were all based on the world's best bodybuilders. Now when I first found these, I knew nothing about bodybuilding. But from there, I fell in love with the sport of bodybuilding because I viewed bodybuilding and those physiques as the physical manifestation of grit, hard work, and potential, which is something I deeply resonated with. But doing it was never personally for me. So when I started doing film in high school, I always had in the back of my mind that I could make videos similar, motivational videos, and that it would be good editing practice at the same time for high school. As a bonus, I thought maybe I could motivate people along the way too. And I feel that I have, in some small way, with over 1,200 subscribers now. Thank you to all of you, by the way. And with some of those videos, well, only one gaining hundreds of thousands of views, it is something I am deeply proud of. But I've ignored this channel now, with it just in the background of my life for the last 8 or so years. But I think it's time it goes through an evolution, the same way that I have evolved over these last 8 years too. So much has happened in my life, as I'm sure it has for every single person watching this video around the world. I've entered so many different phases, as we all have. So let me give you a brief summary of everything, because there are so many lessons I've learned that I hope to share in more detail here one day. So when I finished high school in 2019, I was really lost and I had no idea what to do next. I chose to study law at university, I'm still studying, in a double degree with media, screen and sound production, because since I had no idea what to do, I saw it as a way to pursue my passions of film, because I found that I at least liked that, and couple it with a degree that I thought was, useful on paper, if all else fails, right? Well, I didn't stick with that. I still do law, but almost 6 years later, 1 or 2 years in, I changed to a business degree alongside it. I made mistakes doing that too, but I won't talk about that now. So in 2020, when I entered university, completely lost, but optimistic for the next chapter of my life, COVID shut everything down for my first and second years. And I put my life on hold, as I'm sure it put everyone's lives on hold. So I didn't make any friends for those first 2 years until I tried to get as involved in social life and student life as possible in my third year. But all those stories for another time. I've learned a lot there as well. Fast forward today, getting back in the water has always been on the back of my mind, which is ironic because I haven't swum since 2019, 6 years ago. And when I hung up those goggles for what I thought would be for good, I was in a place where I absolutely hated swimming. I didn't even want to swim recreationally. I'd never got in the water, even when it was like at a lake or in the pool, just never. Because swimming was always just something I did. I never really put much thought behind it. I learned to swim at 2 years old and had done it ever since. There were times I loved it, times I hated it, which is very common with anything that you do in your life that you have a passion for. But yeah, like I said, when I gave it up, ultimately there was only hate left and I was done. Couple that with the thought that I could never really go far in that sport anyway. I wasn't really tall enough, nor did my age group results beckon any Olympic potential. I'm a pretty small guy, 5'10". All my life I was compared to the swimmers that made it, took it all the way, and I was told I could never be them. that there was a limit on my potential because of my height, my build, all those things. And it is very, very true. There is nothing special about me, physically at least. In other ways, I'm not even sure yet. I guess this is what I'm here to discover. Doing a variety of different things throughout the last 6 years really made me lose myself. I led large student groups. I organized large-scale events. I interacted with thousands of people. But all through it, while seemingly good, positive things, I always felt that there was something missing. And there was. During lockdown was the first time I felt the pull of the water again. That was only 2020, 2021. Long months at home, getting way out of shape. And when the pools finally briefly opened in the middle of winter during a short ease of restrictions here in Australia, I was straight in there in a wetsuit. And it was like, a couple of degrees Celsius in the morning. And I did that for one session before I quickly remembered why I quit. Yeah, sounds really good, right? Great motivation. But, from there, life would take me on a completely different journey. I've had opportunities at university outside of my studies that I never thought I would have. And I've made some pretty amazing memories with some incredible people. And I'll always be grateful for those times and for the people I now have in my life. And that was my life from 2022 to 2025. It was a whirlwind and an absolute adventure that I'll always treasure. But I'm not afraid to admit now that I completely lost myself doing it all. The truth is, still to this day, I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the person looking back at me. Some would say that's growth. That's just how life goes. But that's not the way it felt. And that's really scary to me. I reference a verse from the Bible. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? And I felt like that boy with all those hopes and dreams had resigned himself to the opinions of others and the status quo. He resigned himself to a degree he did not want to study, forcing himself down a career path he did not want in corporate law or finance. And that path was all set. It would have been easy to follow. Get an office job, have a family, work for 40 years, retire, die. But I couldn't do that. I can't do that. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe that makes me strong. Maybe that just makes me who I am. I can never seem to put the two together. My future self and my present self being the same person. In my mind, I had these milestones that I would, one day reach. One day you'll finish high school, which I've done. One day you'll finish university, which I haven't done. One day you'll get a job, which I haven't had any proper full-time jobs. You'll fall in love, meet, have a family, watch your friends, get married, have children, bury your parents, become a parent yourself. After all these contemplations, these past few months of being back in the water, being back in the gym, trying to focus on being better, to be competitive again in swimming. All these things have helped me find my way back to the boy who I used to be, who still had hopes and dreams and that, sparkle in his eyes. So after 6 years of forcing myself to accept what I was always told I had to do, what I believed was the right thing to do, I'm now not ashamed to say that, I want none of that. And I never did. I don't want a corporate career. I don't want to work my whole life doing something I'm not passionate about. Life is not that linear path that I thought I'd be on anymore. One that seemed to be decided by others for me. So I thought that the only way to put the pieces back together was to find the boy that I used to be. And the only way to find that person again was to do the thing that had been most consistent in my life, that had dominated most of my life. The thing that I associated with love and hate. The thing that I lost in those 6 years. and the thing that was around long before any of those 6 years came around. And that was swimming. That is swimming. Having watched swimming evolve, if you can't tell, the theme of this video is evolution. Mainly through the new innovative training methods that have emerged in these recent years. This thought of coming back compounded every year since 2021. And for 4 long years now, that spark has grown to a fire that I can't really ignore anymore. 6 months ago, I got back in the gym and I got back in the pool. I've seen these new methods come to life. I've seen athletes come and go. The best example I can reference is Cameron McAvoy. He's an Australian. He's the current reigning 50-meter freestyle Olympic champion. In 2022, Cameron McAvoy was long thought to be past his prime. Even he himself believed so. He wanted to retire. However, he emerged as, a sprint savant. Now 2-time world champion and the reigning Olympic champion. 8 years after when people believed he would peak, when he was expected to win Olympic gold in Rio de Janeiro, and 2 retirements later. He definitely is a big inspiration for me, but I'm not trying to copy what he did or who he is, because every person is on a different journey. What I do admire and take inspiration from is the way he approached swimming in a completely different way. One that was personal, holistic, experimental, and one that was willing to put it all on the line, win or lose. He would find satisfaction in the process and the discovery. He has changed the way the swimming world thinks about swimming training. Now we see that it can be nuanced, different, and personal as athletes most importantly. One that is an expression of them as a whole being and not just a swimmer. To give you some context, it was long practiced and accepted that to become a world-class swimmer, it meant up to 12 swimming sessions a week, miles upon miles, ranging anywhere from 30 to 60 kilometers total in the week. It was endless laps, and strength and gym training was just sort of squeezed in where it could fit around these arduous sessions. But he strayed away from the commonly accepted approach, the laps upon laps. He asked why. Why are we doing miles upon miles? The analogy that he gave that I love is, if you're trying to squat 300 kilograms, why would you do 3,000 reps of just the bar by itself? How's that going to help? And he's 100% right. He drew from the strength, track running and cycling training philosophies, and he took them and used his educational background in physics and developed a completely new approach of pure strength, technique, conditioning, power, mobility that holistically complements swimming. And when he did train in the water, it was pure sprint, maximal effort, low volume, high intensity training. And it worked for him. It worked for him. If you want to achieve something no one else has, you have to do different things. It's a really great thought experiment, that whole concept. Don't just accept the norm. Life works in funny ways. I bring it back to the things I believed and accepted as truth within myself. The truth is, ironically, the truth is whatever you make it in your mind. All my life I've been told by others and even myself that I couldn't do things. And I believed that for so many, many years. I believed that my height would never be enough to be a world-class athlete. That I was too scrawny than most kids my age. I was allergic to chlorine. I still sort of am. So all those things were against me. But this limiting mindset is so dangerous. I know that if I believe for a second that I cannot do this, that I cannot accomplish my goals, that I won't. But I also now know the power of the mind. That if I believe wholly and truly that I can do this, I can accomplish anything. So can we all. Though I may have been a very average age group swimmer with, there are worse physical disadvantages to have, but I have my own that were working against me. I've also learned that hard work and pure obsession can bring you to places you can only dream of. So how am I evolving? In short, I've decided to take a proper run at this. My goal is not to make the Australian team or the Olympic Games. Those would all be amazing. But it's a lot more than that now. My goal is to be able to swim as fast as my body is capable of, wherever that may take me, and to be satisfied with the result knowing that I gave it everything. This is the journey. This is my life, and I control where it goes. So does everyone. This channel is my story. I hope to use this channel to document everything I'm going to do, from being an average swimmer to hopefully as far as I can go. So I hope you'll follow along as I embark on this journey. I'm being pretty brave by putting this all out there and putting it all on the line. But this is what it's all about. And finally and most importantly, I embark on this journey to fulfill my word, my promises. This is a tribute to all the people that have loved me. 6 years ago, I promised my parents they hadn't seen me swim for the last time. And I have every intention to keep that promise. And I also made a promise to a young boy 9 years ago. I promised him that I would live every second to the fullest. And the boy that I promised that to is no longer on earth, my little brother. And almost a decade now, that was one of the last promises I made to him. So I intend to hold my end of that promise too. Who knows what the future holds? Only God. However, now I see more clearly the connection between my present self and my future. That the man I hope to one day become, his habits and his mindset, starts today. It won't just happen without intention. I keep going back to the thought. Do I have what it takes? More recently I've stopped asking myself that. I guess I'll only ever know in retrospect. There's no point in worrying about the future. As the great Mike Mensa said, potential is only the expression of a possibility.
Something that can be assessed accurately only in retrospect. In other words, you'll never know how good you might have become unless you try. So let's get with it.
And if I completely fail by every societal metric, that will not define me either. If I give everything, I can be proud of that. And at least I'll die knowing that I tried. And I will have the answer to my question, did I have what it took? And isn't that more than most can say? So no more what ifs. I'm back. As Michael Jordan would say. I'm not Michael Jordan, but Anyway, follow along.